Welcome to the Hickory Podcast. I am Dr. Ann Vertivec with my co-hosts, Sharon Anderson Morris and Wilfred Audley. Hickory stands for Hope, Health, and Healing in concert with ourselves and the earth. Our conversations and our interviews are meant to inspire hope, health, and healing. Welcome to the Hickory Podcast. Hickory stands for Hope, Health, and Healing in concert with ourselves and the earth. And we had the pleasure of the guest speaker being Dr. Bir Singh Khalsa. In fact, the conversation was so incredible that we actually are making two podcasts from it, because the information of his life's work studying yoga is so transformative that I hope that you will enjoy our interview as much as I did. In honor of International Yoga Day, which is June 21st each year, I found a quote from India's Prime Minister, who was instrumental in creating an International Yoga Day. And he says that yoga embodies the unity of mind and body, thought and action, restraint and fulfillment, harmony between man and nature, a holistic approach to health and well-being. It's not about exercise, but to discover the sense of oneness with yourself, the world, and the nature. And I feel that Dr. Bir Singh Khalsa's beliefs are aligned with this, and we discuss these points in the podcast.
Yeah, no, I thought it was fantastic. So I think I'm really excited for the audience to hear it. One thing that really stood out to me, and it's something that I've mentioned to the audience before, is kind of figuring out what works for you. Yoga, there's many different types of yoga. There's many different variations, and one of the things that he said was figure out what works for you. Try a couple different things out because at the end of the day, it has such profound effects. But first time users might be turned off about one type of yoga, certain parts of the yoga. There's so many different variations that achieve similar results. And I think it's imperative that we all kind of figure out what works for us. And I think that that's a very profound thing, and it goes beyond just yoga. And something that we've talked about before is figuring out what works for you, whether it's your lifestyle, whether it's your effect on climate change, whether it's your harmony with the environment, whether it's finding your place in nature. That all is going to be adaptive and varying upon the individual on who you are. And I've talked about before my formula, and it took me a while to figure that out because it was what I needed to do for myself and my being and my person. So I just wanted to reiterate that point. I'm sure you guys are going to love it, but stay resilient, try different things, and figure out what works for you. And I think that Sharon had gone through that process previously, so I'm interested to hear what she had to think.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, yoga to me has been transformative. I had cancer a long time ago, and I've had the results of complications from the treatment. And I have a yoga instructor that I work with every week, 4 times a week. And she has taught me how to deal with the repercussions of the treatments that I've had to endure. And there's also, she's taught me how to meditate and how to live, because that can be a really depressing thing. We all go through depressing situations. And I'm fortunate enough to find a woman who has and is very, very involved with my life to keep me going through different stages of what I'm going through. In fact, there's something that we just did last week called an embodiment. And people that are very familiar with yoga would know what that means. My whole body was different within 1 hour after being sick for 3 days. My mindset had changed to positive instead of fear because of her involvement in my life. She's my lifelong yoga partner. And I love yoga. There's nothing competitive about it. It's something that I feel when I do my practice helps me tremendously. And I can't imagine 1 week without it. So thank you so much, Anne, for bringing that to our attention.
All right, without further ado, here is Dr. Bir Singh Khalsa. We are honored today to have as our guest Dr. Bir Singh Khalsa, a distinguished researcher of body-mind medicine specializing in yoga therapy since 2001. He's an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, the research director for both the Yoga Alliance and the Kundalini Research Institute, a research associate at the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine, and a research affiliate of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine. In addition, he is the chair of the scientific program committee for the annual symposium on yoga research, which is sponsored by the International Association of Yoga Therapists. I think the upcoming one is this fall. And the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Yoga Therapy. He is also the medical editor of the Harvard Medical School special report called An Introduction to Yoga, and the chief editor of the medical textbook called The Principles and Practices of Yoga and Healthcare. Dr. Singh Khalsa has published over 80 research papers, including at least 50 biomedical research papers on yoga. His clinical research includes well-being and resiliency with yoga, yoga interventions for insomnia, post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic stress and anxiety disorders, and having yoga in both public school and occupational settings. Dr. Singh Khalsa has practiced a yoga lifestyle since 1972 and is a certified instructor in Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan. He has summarized his work in the following quote: "Modern biomedical research on yoga is essential in order to provide scientific evidence to support and justify its inclusion in modern society, including into our societal institutions, such as workplaces, schools, and healthcare settings." Welcome, Dr. Khalsa.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah. So how did you become interested in yoga?
Well, I was an undergraduate student, and I had a real interest in engaging in contemplative practices because I'd done a good deal of reading about altered states of consciousness, and I was sort of shopping around for what might be a contemplative practice that might be able to facilitate those kinds of deeper, more profound states of consciousness. And in my reading, I came across books on meditation, books on yoga, and in one book on yoga, it was, interestingly stated that the advantage to yoga practice is that everything you do in your life is targeted towards that goal of experiencing these deeper unitive states of consciousness, not just the cognitive meditative component, but the breathing practice, the physical postures, exercises, even diet and philosophy. So that made a lot of sense to me. And so I began essentially shopping for a style of yoga to practice. And as it turns out, that didn't take long because I heard that there was a credit course for yoga at the University of Toronto, where I was an undergraduate student, which was, actually pretty remarkable for the time, and still is rather remarkable to say that could happen. And that's where I began my yoga practice in 1971.
Wow. And so how did yoga then become your life's work?
Well, I continued with the yoga practice and became more regular. And then I started, visiting the ashram that was teaching the yoga near the campus. And a couple of years later, I decided that this was meant to be a lifestyle for me. So I moved into the ashram in Toronto in 1973 and immersed myself in that yogic lifestyle, in that ashram community, and worked in the ashram businesses and practiced the daily practice that we did, and just became a part of that lifestyle.
It sounds like a bit of coincidence that it became your life's passion with yoga, just because they happen to have that right course there at your university for you.
Well, it was quite amazing, yeah, for me to hear that, because I was literally on the verge of trying to identify a yoga studio somewhere in Toronto, and then to have to walk into a lounge on campus and hear fellow students talking about this. It was just like somehow the universe was providing me with the answer to my needs. And it was a couple of years later that I decided that what was really important to me, because I was always interested in science, was to do research on yoga. And so in the mid 70s, I set a goal for myself to do research on yoga.
Wonderful. And you certainly have succeeded with that goal.
Well, thank you. But it did take some time. I mean, when I set the goal in 1975, I didn't realize that I wouldn't be able to actually start doing yoga research until 2001.
Yeah, that's a long time.
That's
true.
a long time. Patience pays. But fortunately, I've been sort of fully funded since 2001 and had a successful career in that field, as short as it was.
Yeah. So what is yoga to you?
Well, to me, yoga is, it's a contemplative practice. And most importantly, it's a multi-component practice, because yoga has become very popular in modern society, and there's a lot of forms of yoga out there. And a lot of yoga styles are simply the postures and exercises. But traditional yoga really incorporates a very important component of meditation. And along with that are additional physical techniques, breathing techniques, and deep relaxation. And all of those physical practices in traditional yoga are meant to really support the meditative component, which is there for the achievement of these deeper states of consciousness.
Which actually brings my next question, because your research and teaching describes yoga in these modern scientific terms that, the vast majority of people can understand, instead of the more traditional language. So, and the way you research and discuss yoga benefits can be really understood and appeal to people of all ages, sizes, and backgrounds. And I know that's one of your goals, is to make it more universal, even though, what is it, like 16% of Americans or something practice in the last poll? Maybe it's higher than that.
Yeah, no, we're talking about the federal survey in the United States, and that was 15% in 2017. So we're waiting for the survey results that were conducted in 2022. And given that it was an exponential increase, I suspect we may be, who knows, close to 20% of the population who's practiced yoga within the past year.
Wow, that's amazing. So you mentioned already that you really research the traditional types of yoga, such as Kundalini yoga, that has to include the postures, the breathing, relaxation, and meditation. Those are the types of yogas that you research. And these types of yogas in your research and others have proven benefits in the areas of fitness, self-regulation, specifically like stress and emotion regulation, awareness and mind-body awareness, and spirituality. And all of these contribute to an enhanced global human functionality, or really a better life. What research benefit of yoga are you particularly excited about, or which couple would you like to mention?
Well, I think clearly my original goal was to study these really deeper states of consciousness, these unitive experiences where people experience this deep, profound state of what we call cosmic consciousness, transcendence, flow state, which essentially leads to a change in one's experience of what we might call pure spirituality. And, that was my goal when I wanted to do yoga research. But, clearly when I was able to start research, funding for that kind of an outcome was essentially not really available. What was available, and this was from the National Institutes of Health and National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, was to be able to use yoga for clinical trials for treating essentially disorders. And I happened to be in the field relevant to sleep and insomnia. And so that was my first research. And all of the research funding I got subsequent to that was really targeted at specific medical conditions. So utilizing the therapeutic benefits of yoga for both psychological and physical conditions. But my passion really is understanding and doing research on the benefits of long-term yoga practice on changes in spirituality.
Wonderful. And that you're hoping to have more research specifically with that.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is something that I'm toying with and looking for funding for, to try and actually do some studies, as humble as they might be, to try and advance that understanding of how long-term yoga practice leads to these changes and improvements in spirituality.
Well, it's interesting because I know the research and your research already shows positive changes in brain activity, brain biochemistry, brain structure, neuroplasticity, and gene expression, along with showing, reduced body inflammation and increased immune function. So all of these brain changes it would seem to be a natural to hopefully link them to this increased spirituality or transcendence, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's true. Now I have not done a lot of the research that shows those kinds of specific outcomes. A lot of our outcomes have been sort of clinical outcomes, reducing scores of anxiety, scores on metrics of anxiety disorder, for example, or reducing levels of metrics of insomnia, for example. But yoga research has evaluated those kinds of changes, psychophysiology. What that really represents is an enhancement of many regions of brain function, improving the activity of the central nervous system in many different ways. And then the physical components are there, of course, to improve physical health. And so what yoga really is doing is optimizing all aspects of human function: psychological, emotional, physiological. And when you do that, and you continue to do that, and you continue to optimize those functions, the brain becomes more attuned and more in a place that it can actually manifest these deeper unitive states of consciousness. And typically they occur during meditation practice. And what happens to people when they have that experience, it's a very profound experience. It's very different than very ordinary everyday waking states. When you have this experience of transcendence, it's a deeply unitive state. One experiences a deep sense of oneness, a sense that you are part of the universe is part of you. There's no sense of duality. There's no you and the universe or you and anything else. You are part of one sort of just blissful flow, if you will. And that's a very profound and deep experience. And even though it may be very brief and transient, that experience is so profound that for most people who experience it, it's really life-changing. People change their goals in life, typically going from sort of materialistic goals in life to more non-materialistic goals in life, and changing their lifestyle and changing a lot of their behavior. People will even change their jobs. They'll change their friends because they're now, working towards a different set of positive values and goals in life.
So interesting. I may skip to my last question and go back to my other ones because of what you just described. And I sort of had I certainly did not have it from long-term yoga practice, but I had a transformation and went into integrative medicine somewhat for the type of things. My goals changed, and I'm really focusing on planetary health and human health, which is hence the podcast. But what I was going to ask you was, since we are approaching Earth Day, is there a connection between yoga and planetary health? In other words, does practicing yoga make people more connected to the earth and perhaps more interested in preserving it?
I think that that is absolutely true, because what happens in this unitive state that is that, as I say, you are experiencing the universe as one. So when you're standing in a field, that field is you, you are the field. I mean, it is oneness. And so if you do something to that field, you're really doing it to yourself. And so that experience of the oneness of everything really enhances that respect for the unity around you. And so I think that does change one's one's reverence and one's experience for the environment. One becomes aware that the body is essentially a temple for the place where you can experience these deeper states of consciousness. And of course, if you take that a step wider, the planet is the real temple from where you are experiencing this. Without the earth, we wouldn't be here and have this capability of experiencing that state. So I think definitely these contemplative practices give people much a deeper respect for the health of their body, and then by extension to the health of the planet.
So does your yoga work, both personally and in research, then make you more hopeful about our planet?
It does make me more hopeful, because we know that these practices can be a real solution. They can really change people's goals in life. They can change people's values. And they can relieve people from a lot of the negative behaviors and psychological states, things like greed, things like the lust for power, the lust for money. And these things are really at the root of the many problems that we have in modern society. If we talk about reducing anger, we're talking about reducing violence, which means essentially reducing war. If we talk about reducing greed, we reduce this disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and you take care of poverty that way. And so those are a lot of society's ills. And by changing the behavior of the individuals, if you're able to change all of the individuals into that more positive set of values, where there is less greed, less desire for power or money or fame, there's going to be a lot less of those negatives in society. And that's one of the reasons that I began sort of this movement towards doing research on yoga in the public schools, because if we get yoga into the public schools, all the children will have access to these practices, to be able to improve their mindset, to improve their mental health, and ultimately experience that deeper sense of community amongst the other children in the school, but across the planet as a whole.
Yeah, that's incredible. I do feel, like you say, reaching children is a key, right? They're more open to new things, and can really embrace this type of practice. That's wonderful. You've mentioned some of the ills of society, and you've also described in some of your lectures the epidemic of the chronic lifestyle non-communicable diseases like the heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, depression, anxiety, and obesity. And I've also witnessed the rise in this epidemic in my career, and which is why I became interested in integrative medicine, because I wanted to help my patients more than I felt I was. Modern medicine is not very good at preventing this epidemic of lifestyle influenced diseases, but please elaborate how yoga therapy can help.
So as you say, these diseases are at epidemic proportions. According to the Center for Disease Control, 6 in 10 US adults have a chronic disease, and 4 in 10 have 2 or more. These diseases represent 90% of deaths in the US. They represent essentially 90% of the healthcare costs. So these are really serious diseases that are really at the heart of the problem and the challenges we face in modern health and modern medicine. Now, the risk factors for these diseases are all behavioral because these are essentially lifestyle diseases. And the risk factors are the sedentary behavior that we have in modern society, low levels of physical activity, poor dietary choices, constant imbibing of, highly processed foods with low nutritive but high caloric value, and then dysfunctional health behaviors, most notably cigarette smoking and excessive alcohol consumption. And then added to that is essentially an epidemic worldwide of unmanaged chronic stress, which exacerbates all of those other risk factors. So as you say, modern medicine is not doing very well in preventing, and its goal really has not been really focused on preventing. And it's one of the weaknesses of modern medicine. It's an acute care model of medicine, which is focused on symptom treatment. And that means they spend a lot more time trying to treat the symptoms, and usually with high technology, pharmaceuticals and surgery, as opposed to addressing the underlying cause, which are these lifestyle risk factors. And you cannot treat an epidemic of type 2 diabetes with a pill. It's not going to happen. You have to treat the underlying cause. You have to change all of these risk factors.
Yeah.
And if you don't change those risk factors, you're going to end up where we are right now, which is 90% of deaths and 90% of healthcare costs. And that is the problem. And when you look at what yoga offers from the perspective of increasing and improving physical functioning, improving regulation of stress and emotion, improving mind-body awareness, and then even ultimately over time, making these changes in life purpose and meaning and change in values. These are an excellent fit for changing lifestyle behavior, for addressing these risk factors. I mean, the physical components of yoga are there to improve our capability and our desire to do physical activity. The change in mindfulness or mind-body awareness can actually change lifestyle behavior, because people become, when they start to practice yoga and meditative practices, they become more attentive, they become more sensitive to what's going on internally. They become more sensitive to the kinds of thoughts they're having, they can become more sensitive to their bodily experiences. So that means they become more aware of the consequences of their behavior. So if they go to the gym and exercise, they notice, wow, that feels great. I'm going to go back and do that because I feel great and I want more of that. That's changing the sedentary behavior. With yoga practice, this increase in sensitivity and awareness also works on diet. So, you go ahead and eat 5 chocolate bars and you say, oh my God, how come I feel so bad? I used to eat those all the time. And after I practice yoga, now it feels awful. I can't stand that. I'm going to go and have some vegetables. And then when I did that, I felt really good because, geez, I never noticed how good that felt. So this is behavior change from the bottom up. And mindfulness is really very effective at behavior change because it uses it uses natural perception of reward and natural perception of negative experiences with negative lifestyle behaviors. And then, of course, the self-regulation aspect of yoga is one of the strongest elements of yoga's benefit, to be able to manage stress and emotion. And so this is really capable of dealing with this epidemic of chronic stress that we're facing. So on many levels, yoga has what modern medicine does not have with respect to this epidemic of non-communicable diseases. And so that's the virtue of it.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I agree wholeheartedly. I think the one other aspect I always like to mention to my patients, and it's somewhat with yoga too, is nature exposure. That man doesn't go outside anymore. It's like we spend 90% of our time indoors, and it's an inexpensive or free way for many people, at least, to feel better. So, but I do love that yoga does incorporate so many of these aspects that our patients need.